The sky above was gray and heavy with clouds. Ash fell like snow on the burned ground below. The war had ended months ago, but the planet still looked broken. Buildings were gone, cities turned to dust, and silence ruled the land. Mason walked slowly through the ruins. He was just a scavenger now, searching for supplies. Once he had been a soldier in the Terran Defense Force. Now he was a longista man with a backpack, a rifle, and tired eyes. His boots crunched over cracked stone and metal debris. Suddenly, he stopped. He had heard something. Not a machine, not wind, but a sound, a soft, shaky cry. He tilted his head and listened closely. It was faint, but real, like a child weeping. Mason's body tensed. This planet was supposed to be empty. Everyone either evacuated or dead. He followed the sound carefully, past a fallen column. Beneath a collapsed transport ship, there, in the shadows of a broken cargo pod, he saw her, a little girl, alien but small. Her skin was a soft, bluish color. Almost glowing under the dust, she had long white hair, tangled and messy. Her eyes were large and shining with tears. She wore a thin dress, ripped at the edges. Her knees were tucked to her chest, and she was shaking. When she saw Mason, she gasped and tried to crawl away. But there was no energy left in her body. She slumped forward and covered her face with her small arms. Mason stepped closer. He lowered his weapon and removed his helmet. "It's okay," he said softly, but of course she didn't understand English. Still, she peeked up at him. Then, slowly, she reached out a trembling hand. Her fingers brushed his boot. It was a silent plea. "Help me." Mason's heart squeezed. He knelt down and gently picked her up. She was light, too light. Her arms were thin. Her ribs showed through her skin. She was starving, cold, and terrified. He wrapped her in his jacket and pressed a heat patch to her back. She clung to him like a baby animal, burying her face in his chest. "It's okay," he whispered again. "I got you now." He carried her back to his small shelter. Hidden behind the wreckage of a crashed freighter, it wasn't much, just a space heater, food packs, and blankets, but it was better than the open world outside. He gave her water, which she drank quickly, then some soft food, which she chewed slowly, unsure. Her hands were shaking, but her eyes never left Mason. She watched him like a puppy watches its rescuer, full of fear and hope at the same time. That night, she slept curled up beside him. Holding tightly to his sleeve, Mason couldn't sleep. He stared at the flickering heater and thought, who was she? How had she survived? Where was her family? In the morning, he tried to talk to her. He pointed to himself and said, "Mason." Then pointed to her, hoping she'd give her name, but she just looked at him, confused. Then she touched his chest and softly said, "Ma." Mason thought maybe she was copying his name, or saying her own. He wasn't sure. Over the next 2 days, they stayed hidden. The girl began to trust him more. She smiled when he brought her food, giggled softly when he clumsily drew animals in the dirt. Her laugh was gentle. It melted some part of Mason he didn't know was still alive. Then, on the 3rd day, he heard something terrible. Engines, fast and low. Flying vehicles approaching the ruins. He peeked through the metal sheets that covered the shelter's entrance. 3 black hovercrafts, marked with alien symbols, circled overhead. One of them released a small probe. It scanned the area with red lights, sweeping every inch. Mason's instincts kicked in. He grabbed his rifle, but the girl ran to him and pulled his arm. She looked terrified, shaking her head fast. "No." She whispered in her language. She pointed to the symbol on the craft, then made a slashing motion across her neck. Mason understood. Whoever they were, they weren't looking to rescue her. They were hunting her, and now they were close. Too close. He packed fast, grabbed the emergency cloak to hide their heat signature. He lifted the girl in one arm, rifle in the other. The engines grew louder. Lights flashed through the broken glass above. Mason didn't wait. He ran, taking narrow paths only he knew. Moving through tight alleyways and broken corridors, the girl held tightly to him. Face buried in his shoulder, they reached the underground metro station, a place buried deep enough to hide. He placed her in a corner behind some crates. "Stay here," he said. Then he set traps, silent alarms, and readied himself. He didn't know why he was risking so much, but he knew this: he couldn't let them take her. Not after everything. Later that night, as she lay beside him again, shivering under a blanket, she reached for his hand and whispered again, "Ma." This time, she smiled. And for the first time in years, Mason smiled too. He had no idea that this small act of kindness, saving one lost little girl, would lead him to something far bigger. Because out there, someone else was looking for her. Someone powerful, someone desperate. And when she found her daughter, she would fall to her knees before Mason and ask the unthinkable. But that moment was still to come. The ruined metro tunnels were dark and cold. Mason sat near the wall with his rifle resting beside him. The alien girl was asleep, curled up in a soft blanket. Her breathing steady, but Mason could not sleep. His mind kept going back to the sound of those ships, the red lights, the girl's terrified face. The way she had clung to him like her life depended on it. He had seen fear before, in war, in pain. But this was different. This was the fear of being hunted. Like prey, in the morning, he found her awake, watching him with wide eyes. He gave her some food, a piece of ration bar, which she took carefully. Then, he tried again to understand her. He pointed to himself. "Mason." She pointed to him and repeated, "Ma." Then she pointed to herself and whispered, "Zuri, Zuri." He said, nodding. She smiled. It was the first time he had heard her name. Zuri. As they sat in silence, Mason drew in the dust with a stick. He sketched out the hovercraft, the symbol he had seen. Zuri's eyes went wide. She pointed to it and then made a sign with her fingers, like a broken chain. Then she pointed to herself, and then mimicked being grabbed. Tears welled up in her eyes. Mason didn't need a translator. He understood. Those ships belonged to the ones who had taken her ore. Tried to. Atia, she had escaped somehow. Now they were trying to get her back. But why? She wasn't carrying treasure. She wasn't a weapon. She was just a child. That question bothered Mason all day, but he had no answers. All he knew was that he couldn't let them find her again. They stayed underground that day. Mason explored the tunnels nearby, checking old maps and hidden paths. He found an old maintenance room and set it up as a better shelter. There was a working light, and even an old heating pipe. Zuri was delighted when it warmed up. She ran in circles around the heater, laughing. For a moment, it felt like peace, like maybe she could forget the fear. But peace never lasted long on this planet. That night, while Mason was outside searching for supplies, he saw movement on the surface. Through a broken window, he spotted shadows, 3 figures, armored, moving carefully, scanning the ground. They weren't locals. These were professionals, bounty hunters. Mason returned quickly, heart pounding. He found Zuri sitting near the light, playing with a broken toy he had found for her. He turned it off immediately and pulled her into the shadows. "Quiet," he whispered. Finger to his lips, Zuri nodded and held onto his arm. They listened together. Footsteps echoed above, voices speaking a language Mason didn't understand. But he caught the urgency. They were searching, scanning, hunting. Mason whispered, "We have to move." He packed quickly, grabbed his gear, wrapped Zuri in his jacket, and led her through the side tunnel. There was a deeper level below, a sewer route that hadn't been used in decades. It was damp and smelled terrible, but it was hidden, and right now, that was all that mattered. As they walked, Zuri whispered something in her own language. Then, she stopped and tapped her chest. She looked up at Mason and said slowly, "Bad people." "Want Zuri." Her words were broken, but clear enough. She was learning English. Mason knelt beside her. "Why Zuri?" he asked softly. She looked down and placed a small pendant in his hand. It was hidden beneath her dress. He looked at Ita. Tiny silver disc with a glowing symbol. He recognized it. It was a royal seal. He had seen it during the war, used only by noble families of the Thaleri species. Zuri wasn't just anyone. She was someone important. His breath caught in his throat. That changed everything. She wasn't a random survivor. She was a target because of who she was. Maybe a daughter of someone powerful. Maybe even someone royal. Now it made sense why those bounty hunters were willing to search a dead planet. Why she was so afraid, and why she had survived. Someone must have helped her escape. Mason looked at the pendant. Then at Zuri. She was watching him closely. "I'll protect you," he said firmly. "I promise." She didn't understand all the words, but she heard the tone. She smiled, then leaned forward and hugged him. Her little arms wrapped around his neck, her cheek resting on his shoulder. It was the first hug Mason had received in years. That night, as they hid in the sewer tunnel, Mason stayed awake. He checked his rifle, placed traps at both ends of the passage, and kept the pendant close. He knew more ships would come, and when they did, they would bring fire and death. But for now, Zuri slept peacefully, and Mason, for the first time in a long while, felt like he had a reason to fight again. Not for war, not for orders, but for a child. For someone who had nothing and no one. He didn't know where this road would lead. But he knew this: he would never let them take her. Not while he still had breath in his body, and somewhere far away, across the stars. A mother was searching for the daughter she had lost, and fate was pulling all their paths together. One step at a time. The old sewer tunnel led to a small forest clearing. It was overgrown and half buried under broken metal from a crashed satellite. Mason had found it weeks ago during one of his scouting trips. It was quiet, hidden, and far from the roads. Perfect place to hide. He and Zuri built a new shelter there, using scavenged parts. Nothing fancy, but it had warmth, water, and cover. Zuri seemed to like it. She helped arrange the blankets and sat near the solar lantern, smiling like a child who had just found her first real home. Days passed slowly. Mason taught Zuri how to say new words: fire, water, food. She was a fast learner. Sometimes she even tried to teach him her own alien words. They laughed together when he got them wrong. It was strange how easy it felt, like they belonged together. But Mason never let his guard down. Every day, he checked the perimeter, moved the traps, and watched the skies. He knew the bounty hunters would come back. They wouldn't give up easily. Not with someone like Zuri involved. One night, the air changed. It was too quiet, too still. Mason felt it before he heard it. A soft buzz, then a red laser beam zipped past the trees, hitting one of his perimeter sensors. He jumped to his feet and grabbed his rifle. "Zuri, hide," he said, pointing to the underground hatch behind the shelter. Zuri's eyes widened, but she obeyed. She climbed down quickly and vanished from sight. Mason closed the hatch and activated the lock. Then he turned toward the darkness. A shadow moved between the trees, fast, silent, deadly. Mason fired a warning shot. "Come closer, and I'll drop you," he shouted. But they didn't care. Another shadow moved from the left, then one from the right. They were circling him. He ducked behind a metal wall and activated a trip mine. The explosion lit the trees in orange fire. One enemy screamed. Falling back with a wound, the others rushed forward. They weren't bounty hunters this time. They were mercenaries. Better equipped, more brutal. Mason fought hard. He shot one in the shoulder, another in the leg, but he was outnumbered. One charged and tackled him to the ground. They wrestled in the mud, fists flying, boots kicking. Mason finally grabbed a sharp piece of metal and stabbed the attacker in the side. The merc fell back, groaning, but Mason was bleeding now, cut on his arm and shoulder. The others advanced. He was cornered near the shelter wall. Smoke filled the air. Fire crackled in the distance. Then suddenly, a new sound echoed Zori's voice. "Mason!" she screamed from the underground hatch. "No!" Mason shouted. "Stay down!" But she climbed out anyway, holding something in her hands, one of Mason's old flash grenades. She pulled the pin and threw it. Boom! A burst of light and sound exploded in the clearing. The attacker stumbled. Blinded, Mason used the moment to strike. He tackled the nearest one and knocked him out. Then he grabbed Zori and pulled her. Behind a fallen log, they breathed hard. "Side by side, you're supposed to hide," he said, gasping. Zori was crying, I thought. "I thought they hurt you," she sobbed. He hugged her tight. "I'm okay now. You saved me, but it wasn't over." The last attacker stood up, aiming a weapon straight at them. Mason pushed Zori down and raised his rifle empty. He closed his eyes, thinking this was the end. Then, out of nowhere, strange blue beam hit the attacker and sent him flying. Mason blinked in shock. More beams followed. From above, a sleek silver ship descended. It hovered low, elegant and glowing with alien symbols. A soft female voice echoed from the ship, speaking in Zori's native language. Zori gasped and stood up. "Mama," she whispered. The ship landed gently, and its ramp lowered. A tall alien woman stepped out. She was graceful, dressed in a long flowing suit that shimmered like stars. Her eyes scanned the clearing. Then, locked on Zori, she ran forward and fell to her knees. Zori ran to her and they embraced tightly. Mother and daughter, Mason stood frozen, watching. His heart pounded not from fear now, but from something else, something deep and strange. The woman stood slowly, her eyes filling with tears as she looked at Mason. She spoke softly in her language, then switched to broken English. "You saved my daughter," she said, her voice trembling. Mason nodded. "Yeah, I did." She took a step closer. "I am Alira, mother of Zori, heir of House Valshan." Mason blinked. House Valshan was one of the most powerful noble houses in the galaxy. "I owe you more than life," Alira said, her voice strong now. "You protected her, risked your life for her. I didn't do it for a reward." Mason replied. Alira smiled. "Even more reason." She looked down at Zori. O held both their hands. Then she looked back at Mason and said something that left him completely speechless in our world. "You are now bound to her and through her." To me, Mason had no idea what that meant, but he was about to find out. Because saving Zori wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning. The silver alien ship sat quietly in the clearing, its lights glowing softly in the night. Mason stood frozen, still bleeding from his shoulder, still holding Zori's small hand. In front of him stood Alira, tall and beautiful, with eyes full of emotion. She had just told him that saving Zori meant more than just thanks. It meant a bond. Mason didn't fully understand what she meant. He had saved the girl because it was the right thing to do. But now, it felt like he had stepped into something bigger than himself, something ancient and powerful. Zori looked up at both of them. With innocent eyes, she seemed happy now, peaceful. Like her heart had finally found rest, she held on to Mason tightly, even though her real mother was here. That meant something, and Alira noticed. She walked forward slowly, her silver robe flowing behind her like mist. She placed her hand on Mason's arm. "You are hurt," she said gently. He nodded. "I'll live." Alira turned to one of her guards and spoke in her language. They rushed forward with a glowing medical device. Mason didn't resist. He let them treat his wound. The pain faded quickly. replaced by a warm, tingling alien tech, always amazed him when they were done. Alira invited him to board her ship. "I want to speak to you properly," she said. Mason looked at the girl. Zuri smiled and nodded. She wanted him to go with them inside the ship. Everything was smooth and glowing walls of crystal, soft lights and no sharp corners. The air smelled clean, like flowers and rain. They sat in a round room with cushions and low tables. Alira handed him a cup of warm blue tea. "It will help you rest," she said. Mason took a sip, then looked around. Zuri sat close to him. Refusing to leave his side, the guard stood near the door. Silent and watchful, Alira sat across from him, her eyes studying his face carefully. "You don't know who she is," Alira finally said. "No." Mason replied, "I just know. She was alone, afraid, and needed someone. She is my daughter," Alira said softly, "and she is more than that. She is the heir to my house. The future leader of my people." Mason blinked. "That's a lot for someone so small," he said, trying to smile. Alira smiled back, but her eyes were tired. "She was taken during a political attack," she explained. "Enemies of my house wanted to break me, so they took her. I searched every planet, every corner of the system. Until now." Mason's fists clenched. "They were going to kill her," he said, voice low. "They would have," Alira said, "if you hadn't stopped them." There was a long silence. Zuri rested her head on Mason's arm. Already half asleep, Alira watched this closely. "You were a soldier," she said. "I can tell by your movements." Mason nodded. "Earth lost the war," he said. "Now, I'm just a survivor." "But you saved my daughter," Alira whispered. "That makes you more than a survivor." Mason shifted in his seat. "Why did you say I'm bound to her?" he asked. Alira took a deep breath. "In our culture, the one who protects a royal child with their life becomes part of their soul family. You become their guardians, sometimes even their parent." Mason looked at Zuri, sleeping peacefully beside him. "She already calls me that," he whispered. "She says Ma every time she looks at me." Alira's voice caught in her throat. "She calls you father," she said quietly. "It's not just a name, it's her way of choosing you." Mason didn't know what to say. He had never thought of having a family again. His own people were gone. He had no wife, no kids, no home. But now this child had chosen him. "I don't know if I deserve that," he said, voice rough. Alira leaned closer. "You do," she said. "I saw it in her eyes the moment she looked at you." Then came the next words, the ones he never expected. "In our ways," Alira said slowly, "the guardian of the child may also be offered a union with the child's parent." She looked straight into his eyes. "I am offering you that choice." Mason stared at her, speechless. "You want me to marry you?" he asked. "Yes," she said calmly, "not as a favor, not as a reward, but as a bond. A bond built through trust, sacrifice, and something rare, love from a child." Mason looked down at Zuri again. She opened one sleepy eye and smiled at him, then whispered softly, "Stay." The word was simple, but it struck deep. He wasn't sure what his answer was yet, but something inside him had already decided. Maybe it was fate. Maybe it was something more. But one thing was clear. He wasn't just a lost human anymore. He was something greater now. He was someone's protector, someone's father, and maybe, just maybe, someone's future. Mason sat in silence for a long time. Alira's words echoed in his head again and again. She had just offered him something he never expected, not payment, not praise, but a place in their family. A union, a life, a future. He looked at Zuri, still curled up beside him, her little hand held onto his jacket like it was the most precious thing in the world. She had chosen him before her mother ever did, to her. He was already something more than a stranger. He was comfort, safety, love. Alira remained calm as she watched him think. She said nothing else, gave no pressure, just waited. The silence between them was soft, not heavy. It was the kind of silence that allowed real choices to rise. Finally, Mason broke it. "Why me?" he asked, voice steady but curious. "You don't even know me," Alira smiled. Not coldly, but warmly. "I know enough," she said. "I know that you protected my daughter when you had no reason to. I know that she trusts you in a way she trusts no one else, and I know in my heart that you were sent by the stars." Mason gave a quiet laugh. "I've been called many things, but never that." Alira reached out and gently touched Zuri's hair. "My people believe in signs," she said, "and Zuri survived. Because of you, you may not be one of us. But the stars chose you to carry her through darkness, and now I offer you a place in her light." Mason stared at his hands. They were rough, scarred, calloused from years of battle and loneliness. He had used these hands to fight, to break, to survive. But now, they were being asked to hold something fragile family. "I don't know how to be part of a royal house," he admitted. "I'm not built for that kind of life." Alira nodded slowly. "Neither was I," she said. "I was a soldier first. Just like you." That surprised him. He looked at her again, so graceful, so noble, yet strong. "I only became queen after my mate died," she added. "I swore to protect my daughter, even if it meant losing everything else." Mason nodded. He understood loss. He understood promises. And now, he had one of his own to keep. "I don't want to take her away from you," he said quietly. "She belongs with her real mother." Alira shook her head. "You are part of her now," she said. "Zuri has 2 hands, one for each of us." Mason looked down. Zuri's hand was still holding his jacket. Her other hand was resting on her mother's lap. He smiled. "That's a good way to put it." Later that night, Alira prepared a small ceremony on the ship. It wasn't grand or royal, just sacred. 2 candles, 2 pieces of cloth, 1 small fire. She said it was a bonding ritual from the old days, for warriors, for soulmates, for protectors who became family. Zuri stood in the center, holding a small glass pendant. She gave it first to Mason, then to her mother, then back to Mason again. Alira explained, "This is the seal of House Velshan. To carry it is to be one with us. To wear it is to carry our trust and our future." Mason accepted it without a word. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but he knew this moment meant something real. Zuri looked up at him, eyes full of hope. She reached for his hand, and in perfect, soft English said, "Stay with us." Ah! Mason's chest tightened. That single word carried all the love, all the truth he needed. He squeezed her hand gently. "I'll stay," he said. Alira smiled, not as a ruler, but as a mother, as someone who had lost everything and found it again. She stepped forward and placed her hand on Mason's shoulder. "Then you are no longer just a visitor," she whispered. "You are one of us." From that moment, everything changed. Mason was no longer just a survivor hiding in the ruins. He was part of something greater. He was no longer alone. He slept that night in the comfort of the ship, with Zuri curled beside him and the stars shining above. His dreams were strange, filled with colors and voices he didn't understand. But they were warm, for the first time in years. His dreams had no screams, no fire, no loss. The next morning, Alira told him they would return to her homeworld. She had kept her ship away from her capital for safety, but now it was time to go back. Zuri needed to be seen, protected, claimed, and Mason. He would need to face her people. "They will question you," she warned him. "Some will challenge you. Not everyone wants a human in the royal house." Mason simply nodded. "I've faced worse than words," he said. Alira gave him a strange look. "You may have to face more than words." She said, "There may be a trial." Mason raised an eyebrow. "What kind of trial?" She didn't answer directly, but her silence said enough. This was not just about love, or kindness, or gratitude. This was politics, power, bloodlines, and tradition. And Mason would have to fight to be accepted, not just by Zori or Alira, but by an entire world. Still, as he looked at the little girl who held his hand like it was her whole world, he knew he would do it, whatever it took, because Ziri had chosen him, and he had already chosen her. The royal ship flew through the stars with quiet speed. Mason sat near a wide window, watching the galaxies pass by beside him. Zuri leaned against his arm, drawing small pictures on a glowing tablet. Across the room, Alira stood with her guards, whispering instructions in her native language. They were going home, to Alira's world, to the palace of House Velshan. And Mason was going to face a crowd of aliens who didn't know him, who might not accept him. He took a deep breath. He had faced battlefields before, but this felt different. This wasn't about bullets or bombs. This was about honor, tradition, bloodlines, and love. Ziri suddenly looked up at him. "Ma," she whispered, "you okay?" Mason forced a smile and nodded, just thinking. Zuri touched the glass pendant that now hung around his neck. "You have my light," she said proudly. He didn't fully understand what it meant, but it made him feel stronger. The ship landed on a floating palace surrounded by silver towers and crystal gardens. The air was filled with strange music and glowing insects that danced like stars. Mason had never seen anything like it. Guards stood at every entrance, wearing long robes and shining armor. Their eyes followed him closely. He was the only human in sight. Alira led him and Zuri through a long hallway filled with carvings and portraits. Each one showed a past ruler, noble faces that stared down with judgment. At the end of the hall was a large golden door. Behind it, the High Council waited. "They are the elders of our people," Alira explained. "They will decide whether you may stay in Zori's life and mine," she added softly. Mason nodded. "I'm not here for power or position," he said. "I just want to protect her." Alira gave him a look that was both grateful and sad. That may not be enough for them. The doors opened. Inside was a wide circular chamber with blue flames dancing around the walls. 12 elders sat in high seats, each wearing long robes marked with family sigils. Their faces were serious, cold, unreadable. Mason stood in the center, with Zuri by his side and Alira behind him. One elder stood, his voice deep and sharp. "You are the human who claims the bond of the child. I don't claim her." Mason said calmly. "She chose me," murmurs echoed around the chamber. Another elder leaned forward. "And you accepted our queen's offer of union." "I did," Mason replied. "Not for power, but for family." The first elder frowned. "Humans are not of our blood," he said. "They are short-lived, reckless, and wild. Why should we let one enter our noble house?" Before Mason could answer, Zuri stepped forward. She stood tall, her little voice ringing through the hall. "He is brave," she said. "He saved me." The room went silent. Zuri pointed to Mason. "He fed me, held me, fought for me. When I was cold, he gave me warmth. When I was scared, he stayed. He is my ma." Tears welled in Alira's eyes. The elders whispered among themselves. Then the first elder raised his hand. "The child speaks with heart," he said, "but heart is not enough." He turned to Mason. "You will face the trial of echoes," he declared, "a test of mind, spirit, and soul. If you pass, you may stay. If you fail, you will leave forever." Zuri gasped and grabbed Mason's hand. "No," she cried. "I want him." Mason knelt beside her. "I'll be okay," he whispered. You wait for me. Alira touched his shoulder. You don't have to do this, she said softly, but Mason nodded. Yes, I do. He was taken to a sacred chamber beneath the palace. It was dark, filled with a soft hum. The walls glowed with ancient runes. A floating crystal hovered in the center. A priestess entered and explained, "The crystal will show your truth." She said, "Your pain, your strength, your heart." Mason stepped forward and touched the crystal. In an instant, memories hit him like lightning: war, fire, loss, his squad mates dying, his home gone, the emptiness, then Zuri, her tears, her laughter, her smile when she called him Ma. The crystal pulsed with light. It showed his hands bloody in battle, then gentle while feeding a child. It showed his heart broken by war, mended by love. It showed his soul not perfect, but strong. When it ended, Mason collapsed to his knees. The priestess stepped forward and helped him stand. "You have passed," she said quietly. "You are not of our blood, but your soul has chosen us." Later, Mason returned to the council chamber. He stood once more before the elders. This time, with light in his eyes, the first elder nodded slowly. "You have earned your place," he said, "not by force, but by truth." Alira stepped beside Mason and took his hand. Zeri rushed forward and hugged them both tightly. The hall filled with soft music, and the flames glowed brighter. Mason was no longer just a visitor. He was now part of their world. He was chosen, trusted, and tested, and he had passed for Zuri. He was no longer just a protector. He was her father. Truly, and for Alara he was more than a savior. He was the man she would share her life with. The sky over House Valshan was filled with soft purple clouds. A gentle wind blew through the silver trees as the sun rose over the floating palace. Bird-like creatures sang in the distance, and lights shimmered through the air like fireflies. It was a day of peace, a day of change, a day of new beginnings. Mason stood on the high balcony, dressed in traditional robes that had been carefully made for him. They were a blend of his own culture and Alira's royal designs. Gold threads wrapped across his shoulders, and a small symbol of House Valshan was pinned near his chest. He looked out at the city below, still trying to believe it was real. He had come to this world with nothing, no family, no plan, no purpose. And now he was part of a royal house, a protector, a father. Zori ran out onto the balcony with her usual energy. She wore a small crown made of white petals and silver beads. She reached for Mason's hand and pulled him toward the inner garden. "Come," she said, smiling, "it's starting." In the garden, everything had been prepared. A circle of ancient stones stood tall around a small glowing pool. Soft music played from floating instruments, and flowers drifted gently in the air. Dozens of guests were gathered: nobles, scholars, guards, and citizens of the royal city. They had all come to witness something rare. A bonding ceremony between the queen and the human who had saved her daughter. Alira entered from the other side of the garden. She wore a long dress, made of living light, shifted colors as she moved. Her face was calm, her eyes shining. She looked at Mason and smiled, not as a queen, but as a woman who had found love again. Mason walked forward, Zuri holding one hand and a small glowing pendant in the other. This was the final piece of the ceremony. He would place the pendant into the water, speak the ancient words, and be joined with Aliri. Not just in name, but in spirit. The priestess stood in the center, her voice calm and clear. "We gather here, not for power, not for wealth, but for family," she said. "We honor a man who crossed stars not to conquer, but to care. We welcome him as one of us." Mason stepped forward, heart pounding. He looked at Alira, then at Zuri. He dropped the pendant into the pool. The water glowed bright blue, sending light up into the sky. Then he spoke the words he had practiced. "In your light, I found home," he said. "In your eyes, I found. Truth, in your daughter, I found my heart. The crowd was silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, they bowed their heads. It was done. Alira walked to him and gently touched her forehead to his, a sign of deepest trust. Then she looked down at Zuri. Zuri smiled wide and hugged them both at once. You are my ma and my mom, she said happily. Ate, and now we are one. The celebration lasted all night. There was dancing, music. Ate and food Mason couldn't even name. Children ran through the garden. Adults raised glowing glasses in honor. But Mason stayed close to Zuri and Alira. He didn't need the attention. He already had everything he wanted. Later that night, after the crowd had gone and the lights had dimmed, Mason stood outside with Alira and Zuri. The stars above were clear and bright. Alira leaned against him, her hand resting gently on his chest. Do you regret it? She asked softly. Leaving your old world behind, Mason looked up at the stars. No, he said, with quiet certainty. I think I was always meant to be here. He looked down at Zuri, who had fallen asleep in his arms. She saved me too, in her own way, he added. Alira smiled and kissed Zuri's forehead. And you saved both of us. Mason thought back to the ruins. To the moment he first heard the little girl crying, he had no idea then what that choice would lead to. He had only followed his heart, and that one act of kindness had brought him to this moment. To a family, to love, to peace. He would always carry his past to battles, the losses, the pain, but now he also carried hope. And every time Zuri called him Ma, it reminded him that the stars had guided him true. He was no longer a lost soldier. He was no longer a lonely wanderer. He was a father, a protector, a partner, and above all, he was home.